Hi, welcome to this presentation on what's new in IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1.14, IBM Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.10, and IBM Spectrum Copy Data Management version 2.2.15. I'll be going over what's new in Spectrum Protect, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Sean Sperry to go over what's new in Spectrum Protect Plus and CDM. All of these are becoming available on March 11th, 2022. The first new feature is multi-factor authentication for interactive administration sessions. Back in version 8.1.9, we introduced the ability to require administrator approval for restricted commands. And in this version, you can now optionally add to that multi-factor authentication for the interactive admin logins. You can also utilize multi-factor authentication without having turned on the command approval for restricted commands. The multi-factor authentication implements a timeout one-time password using industry standard algorithms and is reliant on a shared secret. So the way that this works is that an administrator is registered or updated to use MFA, and the first time they sign back in to Spectrum Protect Administrative Command Line or Operations Center, they'll see a QR code or a text-based shared secret. They will then use that secret inside of a mobile app or a desktop app to generate a 6-digit passcode, which is valid for 30 seconds. They'll take that passcode and, utilizing their Spectrum Protect administrator ID and password, they'll also enter that passcode, and then they'll be able to log on. You do need to turn on MFA for each administrator, so you can either use the register admin command and turn MFA required equals yes, or you can update an existing administrator with MFA required equals yes. You can also, of course, do this in the Operations Center. You also have the ability to specify a shared secret, and this would be useful if, for instance, the same administrator name is being used in multiple Spectrum Protect servers. And you can also issue a reset shared secret equals yes if that shared secret was lost and needed to be reset. If you want to see if the administrator has MFA turned on, you can issue the query admin format equals detailed, and you'll see 3 states for multi-factor authentication required. The first one is no, which means it has not been set for that administrator. Yes means it's in strict mode and you are required to enter the authentication code at login for that administrator. And then transitional means it's been turned on, but that administrator has not yet logged back on and enrolled in MFA. If multi-factor authentication is turned on for administrator, when they log on, they will have to not only enter their traditional password, but they'll also have to enter a one-time passcode. And this passcode is generated either on a cell phone or similarly trusted device that only that administrator can access. That particular passcode generator will have to be a security app with RFC 6238, TOTP, which is a time-based authentication, SHA-1, 6-digit code generator, and generate at 30-second intervals. You also have to make sure that your Spectrum Protect server is in sync with the current time so that when you do use these security apps, they are able to correctly generate that code. And this is because we use a 30-second interval that's set from the beginning of Unix epoch time. I have 2 demos on YouTube for using multi-factor authentication. One is using it with the command line interface, and one is using it with the Operations Center. For the Operations Center, the Spoke and Hub servers have to be at version 8.1.14 and above to support multi-factor authentication. When an administrator logs on to the Operations Center, so they enter their admin ID and their Spectrum Protect admin password, if they are in transitional state, they will see this screen here where they can either scan this QR code or they can copy this URI, and they'll enter or scan this to an application either on their phone or on their desktop. This is basically contains information about the shared secret. That application will then generate a 6-digit code, and that 6-digit code will be valid for 30 seconds and can be entered here where it says passcode. That will then allow them to log on to the Operations Center. The next time they log on to the Operations Center, they will once again enter their Spectrum Protect admin ID and Spectrum Protect admin password. When they click login, they'll be asked to enter a passcode. So they'll go back to that same security application, either on their desktop or phone, and get the latest, most current 6-digit code and enter it in the passcode field, and then click continue. And at that point, they'll be logged on. If they do choose to copy the URI, down here is what the URI looks like. And most of the desktop security apps are just interested in this shared secret. And so you'll enter that shared secret in there. You'll make sure you've specified that this is TOTP, which means it is a time-based generation for every 30 seconds and a 6-digit code. This shared secret can be also used to share with an administrator, maybe with the same name on a different Spectrum Protect server. Now, if you're logging on with the Spectrum Protect admin command line, it looks a little bit different. So an admin who's in the transition mode, the first time they log on, it will come up and show that they are in the transition mode. And the only command you can issue when an administrator's in transition mode is either help or generate secret. So once they're logged on, they'll get this message that they are in transitional mode and they need to issue this generate secret. So when they issue a generate secret, they will then copy that shared secret over to a security application and have that application generate a 6-digit code. They will have logged off of the Spectrum Protect admin command line, and next time when they log back on, they will enter their Spectrum Protect administrator ID, their normal Spectrum Protect admin password, followed by that 6-digit code. And then that will allow them to log on and issue all the commands. So some details on multi-factor authentication. It can only be turned on for other admins by an admin with system privileges, or all admins can turn on their own MFA. However, all admins cannot turn off their own MFA. Only another system admin can turn off your MFA. And if you do have command approval turned on, if you try to turn off MFA, then it must be approved by another admin. Now, MFA is only for interactive admin sessions, so if you have unattended operations or scripts out there, don't use an admin with MFA. Instead, what you should probably do is generate a new ID for those unattended operations and use a strong, complex password that's only used for that automation. You don't want to use MFA for administrators using SP for VE GUI, and all of your client backup archive commands are not affected by MFA, except if you are logging on using administrator credentials, for instance, in a help desk environment. If you have server-to-server features that require logging in with administrative credentials on a remote server, for instance, server-to-server command routing, server-to-server export imports, or if you're pinging a different server, then if the administrator ID on the source server is using MFA, then MFA is also required on the target server for that admin. So the administrative ID must have the same password on both servers, and this is when you would want to use that shared secret option so that both of those Spectrum Protect admin IDs have the same shared secret. And of course, MFA state has to be strict on both servers. If you're doing this manually, you have to turn on MFA on both of those servers. So there are 3 methods to ensure that these admin IDs are synced up to the different servers. If you've got enterprise configuration turned on, it will push out the admin's MFA state and shared secret from the config manager Spectrum Protect server to the subscribing Spectrum Protect servers. If you do an export admin, that will export the admin's MFA state and the shared secrets. And then on the reverse side, the import admin will update them on the importing server. You can use replace defs equals yes to update existing administrators versus going in and having to update or register those new admins. And then the third method is you could manually issue register admin or update admin with MFA required equals yes, shared secret equals, and then update that on the secondary server. Now, an administrator using MFA can route commands to down-level servers and storage agents. The source server knows that the target doesn't understand MFA, but an admin cannot route commands from down-level servers to a 8114 server if that particular admin requires MFA. Okay, so be sure to check out those couple videos on multi-factor authentication. The next new feature extends our Google Cloud support to include Coldline and Archive. So back in 8.1.11, we introduced cloud container support for Google Standard and Nearline for both our backups and our Spectrum Protect database backups. In 8.1.13, we introduced the ability to copy retention sets to the cloud for Standard and Archive, but those were for other vendors. So now in 8.1.14, we're extending both our container storage pool and copy retention set support and our database backup support to support Google Coldline and Archive. If you're doing the container storage pool, you now have the option to do defined storage pool, and then with your cloud storage, you can choose Coldline or Archive. For retention sets or Spectrum Protect database backups, if you're doing a defined dev class, you now have the option to choose cloud storage class equals Nearline, Coldline, or Archive, or the default. The nice thing about the Google Coldline or Archive is it does not require the staging of those retention sets from the Google Coldline or Archive before you can restore them. And that's in contrast to some of the other cloud providers who do require you to first stage the restores from those Coldline or Archive classes. Now, one thing to note is that the Google storage classes, when you specify them, they are kind of dependent upon how long you plan to keep that data out there. And so if you look at the Google documentation, Google is going to charge for minimum storage duration. And so standard is 0 days, Nearline 30 days, Coldline 90 days, and Archive 365 days. So if you do choose to use the Google Clouds, look very closely at how you're going to be storing your data in those different storage classes before you choose one of those classes. Spectrum Protect sets the storage class when the Spectrum Protect uploads those objects. So you can go out and change the storage class, but it will only impact any uploads that occur after the change. So any of your new backups, any of your new copy retention sets, any of your database backups will only be impacted after you make the change. I do have multiple videos out there. The newest one talks about using Archive and Coldline storage in Google, so check that out. If you want more history, I have setting up Archive classes for the other type of cloud providers, as well as how to set up Google Standard and Nearline. Inside of the Operations Center, we have a lot of capability around this. If you are adding a cloud container storage pool, you'll go into Operations Center, Storage, Storage Pools, and click on the plus Storage Pool button. You will then click on General Storage Pool. You'll give it a name, and you will choose it as an off-premise cloud. And from that drop down for the cloud connection, you'll create a cloud connection, and that will be either a Google Standard, Google Nearline, Google Archive, or Google Coldline. So this is a container storage pool that you would use to send your backups or archives to. You can look at the details of this storage pool by going into the Quick Look. So once you've defined that storage pool, simply select that storage pool and click on Quick Look inside of OC Storage Pools Quick Look. If you want to make any changes to the details, for instance, update the password or update the cloud storage class, you'll go into OC Storage Pools, Details, select that storage pool, click on Details, and then you need to, first of all, unlock that cloud setting underneath Properties, and then you can choose a different cloud storage pool or do things like reset your bucket name, your connection name, or so forth. Now, if you want to use that Google Cloud Coldline or Archive for a retention set destination or for a Spectrum Protect database backup destination, then you first need to create that account and bucket on Google. Then you'll want to create the cloud connection inside of Spectrum Protect, which links the Google information to your Spectrum Protect server. And then finally, you'll want to define that device class inside of Spectrum Protect and create a cloud storage pool and storage rule. You can also create or update that retention rule, and then you have the ability to manually start that retention rule and storage rules. Remember, it's these retention rules and storage rules that actually create the copy of the in-place retention sets out to the cloud. So do check out the demos I have on how to do this if you want more information. The next new item is a new offering in the Spectrum Protect family. It is Spectrum Protect Plus online services for Microsoft 365. And this provides full data protection for Microsoft 365 workloads, as well as other cloud-based workloads in a SaaS environment. So this new offering is highly scalable. It supports everything from your Exchange Online to OneDrive for business to SharePoint Online to Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, Project Online, public folders, and Yammer. Now, it can be accessed via https spponlineservices.ibm.com. And what it provides is unlimited, automatic, incremental backups up to 4 times per day. On the flip side, you've got granular in-place or out-of-place restores. And the restore mechanism allows you to filter on content type, owner, date created, file size, parent list name, parent folder name, email subject, date sent, and so forth. Now you can also restore to file systems or export as a PST. The licensing on this is a per user per month license, and you've got 2 options. The first is you use the IBM's Azure storage to store your backups in that Azure blob, or you can bring your own storage. And this could be Azure storage, which you have your own license for, or an S3 or SFTP attached storage, or Dropbox. Now this is a separate PID. It is not part of the Protect or Storage suites. I do have 2 YouTube videos out there. The first is a PowerPoint that kind of walks through the high levels on this offering, and the second is a high-level demo. Now, Spectrum Protect Plus online services for Microsoft 365 is 100% software as a service. So you yourself do not need to provide any type of hardware, and you don't have to install any type of software. All of that's done for you. At the initial rollout, we have 4 cloud instances. That's the Canadian, the US East, the UK South, and the German Central locations. And then as time passes, you'll see us offering more cloud instances. So this 99.9 service availability is automated. In addition to the automated backups, we provide automated version updates and fixed deployments. It's really simple to use this IBM Spectrum Protect Plus online services for Microsoft 365. You're going to log in with your Microsoft account, and that does need to be a tenant owner. You're going to go through a setup wizard, which will basically manage your application connections and scan the rules that you're connecting and backing up the correct information. It'll set up reporting, networking, and storage connections during this initial wizard setup. And then you'll simply be able to do operations against this, whether it's configuring the backup frequency and retention times, or whether it's doing restores or generating reports or checking the job log. So do check out the couple videos I have on IBM Spectrum Protect Plus for the online services for Microsoft 365. I think you'll really love the extent of what we protect in Microsoft 365 and the flexibility for this SaaS offering. Okay, with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sean to cover the other Spectrum Protect Plus enhancements and CDM. Thank you.
Okay, so I am going to continue with Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.10 and talk about some of the changes or upgrades in the main product. Beginning with protection for cloned Windows systems on Hyper-V and VMware. As you recall, in a previous version of Spectrum Protect, we added file system protection for Windows systems, and they can be either physical or virtual machines. But in previous versions of the product of Spectrum Protect Plus, the key that Spectrum Protect Plus used to identify those physical and virtual machines was based on the UUID of the machine. So if you cloned the machine and didn't change the UUID, you would basically end up with a system that you could not restore from. So beginning in version 10.1.10, we have addressed that problem in Spectrum Protect Plus. So you can now either physically or in VMware or Hyper-V protect a cloned Windows system using file system protection in Spectrum Protect Plus. The summary of this is basically you just want to make sure that you clone the machine either before the first backup of Spectrum Protect Plus is run on that machine. When Spectrum Protect Plus runs a backup, it goes in there and it creates a registry entry on the machine in this HKey local machine software IBM Spectrum Protect Plus agent entry on the registry. And that entry contains the key, which is generated the first time the file level protection is run. So bottom line, if you clone the machine before that first backup is run, you'll have a unique key and you'll be able to protect the clone with Spectrum Protect Plus if that's what you want to do. Or if you don't have, if you haven't run the backup, but you already have this entry in the registry, what you can do is go out and delete that entry, and then the first time you run the Windows file system backup, that entry will be recreated with a new and unique ID to be used in Spectrum Protect Plus. Now, just a warning, if you have backed up to Windows file systems with the same key, the same primary key in Spectrum Protect Plus, this will not fix that, right? What you'll need to do is go out to this support content uh, entry from the IBM support pages and use that process or procedure to correct the issue of the duplicate primary keys. Okay, so continuing with Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.10 and later. For those of you who may not be aware, IBM has introduced a new appliance or bundle called IBM Spectrum Fusion. And what this is a bundle of products that lets you do container management and implementation in basically a hyper-converged infrastructure. So it includes everything you need to do to run OpenShift and to have the storage and the data protection infrastructure necessary to do that. Now it is bring your own subscription for OpenShift, but it does include IBM Spectrum Scale ECE, which is Erasure Code Edition for managing the disks and handing them up to the OpenShift cluster. It includes Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.x, so the latest version of Spectrum Protect Plus. And it also includes high appliance management software to help you maintain and manage this hyperconverged infrastructure. Now, in order to support this environment, beginning in 10.1.10, Spectrum Protect has introduced some changes to the API to allow Spectrum Fusion to be able to control it and to do the data protection for the storage associated with Spectrum Fusion. Basically, we have implemented a new set of custom resources, and those are going to be an alternative to the way the APIs in Spectrum Protect Plus work today. So right now we have a REST API and the so-called BASREC CR of the Backup as a Service client for Spectrum Protect Plus. So beginning in version 10.1.10 and later, we're going to have this new infrastructure with this new API. Currently, this is only going to be available for within the version of Spectrum Protect Plus for backing up Spectrum Fusion, and it's going to allow you to do data protection operations on that storage infrastructure that is delivered with Spectrum Fusion. So basically, Spectrum Fusion is going to be driving the SPP operations through this new interface. Now, the old interface and the way things used to work is going to continue to exist for the moment, and that's just to support the people who aren't necessarily moving to Spectrum Fusion right away. So basically, as I mentioned in the previous slide, what this is a new set of custom resources and YAML that is going to allow and be dictated and was dictated by the way Fusion manages Spectrum Protect Plus. So you will either be able to interface with Spectrum Protect Plus through the Fusion UI, or if you want to use a command line and YAML, you'll be able to go in and change these custom resources through editing the YAML and control Spectrum Protect Plus that way. This is just a snapshot of the Spectrum Fusion UI. So what you see here is a picture of the Spectrum Protect Plus SLAs, which for those of you who are familiar with Spectrum Protect Plus know that that's how it works, except these are now exposed in the hyperconverged infrastructure appliance management software, so you can control the data protection for this OpenShift environment using the Spectrum UI. And again, that's being delivered in Spectrum Protect Plus version 10.1.10, and it's going to be rolled into Spectrum Fusion as new versions of Spectrum Fusion come out. Beginning in 10.1.10, we've changed the way that resources are allocated to sites. First of all, we made this setting part of a wizard in 10.1.10. And in previous versions, it really only applied to VMware resources. But beginning in version 10.1.10, it's now going to apply to all of the types of data that Spectrum Protect Plus supports. So that includes VMware data, database data, application data, and container backup data. Now, by default, you're going to get balanced for the two sites that come with Spectrum Protect Plus, so primary and secondary. Those are the two default sites that you get with the product. If, however, you upgraded from version 10.1.9, those settings are going to be slightly different. In 10.1.9, the VMware data would have been allocated by free space, that is the size of the virtual machines, whereas now, beginning in 10.1.10, it's going to be by the number of virtual machines and other types of data that you're sending to the site. And again, beginning in 10.1.10, you can create a site and adjust these values or access this wizard and change this value based on your choosing and how you want to allocate the data. Now, there's been some change in the replication policy retention for SLA. In previous versions of the product, or 10.1.9 and earlier, the replication policy retention setting was dependent on the backup policy retention setting. And beginning in version 10.1.10, now the replication policy retention setting is going to be totally independent from the backup policy retention setting. So basically you can select backup storage replication and remove the selection for same retention as source selection that you can see in the checkbox here over in the right hand side. And if you want to pick a particular date, you can do that and set it to a particular number of days, weeks, months, or years. For VADP communications, you'll remember that in an earlier version, or I think it was the last version as a matter of fact, we changed the VADP communications, and in 10.1.10 for VADP proxies, we have reverted back to use the REST API for communication between the VADP proxies and the Spectrum Protect Plus server. So basically, you need to be aware of the IBM Spectrum Protect hostname and IP plus hostname and IP address of the server, and the port on the VADP proxy is going to need to be open for communication when you use VADP proxies. This has been updated again or back in 10.1.10. This is a continuing theme that we have in Spectrum Protect Plus. We're continuing to enhance the documentation and update the REST API documentation for those of you who want to communicate with Spectrum Protect Plus directly. We've introduced new topics in the API documentation that covers setting the global preferences, reading them, and updating them in an example, and also additional documentation on SLA policies, assigning a service level agreement policy, and unassigning resources from an SLA policy. Beginning in version 10.1.10, we have also removed all references to the Log4j libraries that were vulnerable. You recall that was a pretty big issue with Java over the end of last year, the end of 2021. And we now support Microsoft Windows Server Standard and Data Center editions under VMware for doing file indexing. Moving on to Spectrum Copy Data Management, we're going to be releasing 2.2.15. And here are some of the enhancements to support SVC. Basically, beginning at version 8.4.x, client hosts in the SVC that support multiple protocols, so they support both Fiber Channel and iSCSI, are now going to have multiple SVC storage hosts, one per protocol, listed in SVC. And so we have had to enhance and change and upgrade Spectrum Copy Data Manager to support those LUN mappings and LUN cleanup when you use those storage hosts and host clusters in operations for Spectrum Copy Data Management. We've also done a numerous security fixes for Log4j, Postgres, open updates to OpenSSH and OpenSSL, and we have added a new server NAT address field in the global settings to allow SCDM to be restrictive to its own and configured NAT IP addresses. Finally, we now support TLS 1.2 on SQL servers, and we have documented how you can exclude antivirus settings for the Spectrum copy data agents. So that concludes these upgrades for Spectrum Protect Plus, and copy data management for this first quarter of 2022. I hope you found this information useful, and I look forward to seeing you in another video.